All right. I think live. I think we're good to go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the first ever Med School Moose live stream. We're going to be talking all about residency interview advice. I'm going to give it a few more seconds to let some other people join into the chat, but thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here, my name is Masood Mohammed. I'm a board certified emergency medicine physician. I'm the creator of Med School Moose. I've created tons of educational and high yield content for medical students and residents. And in addition to all of that, I am a faculty member at a residency program. I'm on the committee that interviews medical students, and I'm also on the committee that determines the final rank list. So I've been on both sides of the process. I do have some experience with this, which is why I wanted to do this live stream. But before I go any further, be sure to subscribe to my channel to receive all of my latest videos. Check out my website, medschoolmoose.com. Follow me on social media at medschoolmoose on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, wherever you are, and join in on the fun. Like I said, I've written a lot of articles on residency interviews in the past. I've done videos on this kind of thing, but I really wanted to create a live stream to get to know you guys, to answer all of your questions, and to get a little bit more personal. So we're still waiting a second for some other people to join. While we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share the schedule, kind of what we're going through today. So we're going to be talking about what to expect on interview day, some of the must-know tips to set yourself up for success so that you crush your residency interview, mistakes to avoid, some of the questions that you need to prepare for. And of course, I'm going to be checking the chat the entire time. So if you guys do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and I'll be answering them along the way. Stingray4728, hello, good to see you. You were number one. Karna Mangrola, hello, good to see you too. Let's see if anyone else joins. We got a few. And we can just go ahead and get started. So, before we go any further, I do want to ask you guys, what medical school are you at right now? Tell me what specialty you're going into. Like I said on this live stream, I want to be chatting with you guys. I want to get to know you, all of my amazing subscribers and followers. So drop that in the chat. Let me know what's going on. But let's get into it. So let's first talk about what to expect on interview day. So nowadays, interviews are kind of two big categories, right? There's going to be the virtual residency interviews, which I think are kind of the majority at this point, and they're going to be the in-person interviews. The template for both of them is going to be about the same. You're going to, meet with the program director, kind of get an overview of the program, of the residency, what it has to offer you, some of the background about the curriculum, the benefits, where their residents have gone, what fellowships they offer, all of those things. That's typically the first thing that happens is the interview, the information session. After that, a lot of programs do it differently, but there's some type of breakout sessions where you're doing interviews. Now, this might be one-on-one with the program director or a faculty member. There may be a couple different faculty members from the residency program in the interview, but you're going to go through a few of those different types of interviews. If you guys have questions about this while I'm chatting, let me know because there's a lot of different formats. Sometimes it'll just be one-on-one, like I said. Sometimes it'll be a group interview. So it'll be you and a few other medical students that's interviewing with the program director or someone else from the residency leadership. So there's a lot of different things to kind of navigate as you're going through this. But that's going to be the general setup. At some point, there is typically some type of time set aside to get to know the residents. If you're on an in-person interview, you're typically going to get a tour of the department, of the hospital, of the facilities. And that's a really important time because the residency leadership, the faculty typically isn't there when that's happening. So that's a really great time for you to get some one-on-one experience, getting to know the residents, getting to ask them some of the questions that it might be a little bit nervous to ask when you're with the residency leadership. So asking things like what they like about the residency, what they hate about the residency, what their schedule's like. Do they have time for all the adult things that we need to do while we're still in residency, right? We're still people. So definitely that's a really important time. A lot of residency programs will have some type of social event. If it's virtual, I know that, my residency program would do a game night kind of over Zoom the night before. In person, you might go out to, like laser tag or go out and get some food, something like that. Again, a little bit more informal time to get FaceTime with the residents, ask them all those burning questions that you want to know. So that's kind of the different types of interviews that can happen on interview day. Let me know if you've had interviews so far, what your interview experience has been like, and we can certainly talk about that. Check in the chat real quick. Hello, Jack Teshwar. Hello. Let's see. Tell us what some of the most out there questions you got on your interviews are. We're definitely going to be talking about some of the questions to expect on interview day later on. Karna is asking, speak a little bit about how to strategize for virtual interviews. I feel virtual interviews are disadvantageous to applicants. This is a really good point, and this is something that can be tough to navigate. And I've written a few articles on this before. Check them out on medschoolmoose.com. But the virtual interview, it kind of takes a little bit of that personal experience, that personal touch out, right? You're not getting to be one-on-one with that person in their office. You're not getting to get a real, in-person tour of the hospital. The important things I think there are to make sure that you're still making a genuine connection. You want to still be yourself. You want to still be able to have a good conversation, get all the information about yourself out there, and also ask all of your questions. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get a full-fledged experience about the residency program. So it's still super important to be doing that. So really great question. Let's see. Lives Good 100 is asking, two individual interviews mean two people will be interviewing us. Yes, I have seen this happen. So it depends on the program, but sometimes it'll just be one person from the residency leadership, whether that's a faculty member or the program director or the assistant program director. It might just be that one person interviewing you. But I have seen some interviews where it'll be two people. So it might be the program director and the assistant program director. They're both interviewing you at the same time. It's not very common. I did have some of these interviews when I was on the interview trail myself, but just be aware that it is out there. It's I don't really know what the rationale is. They're not trying to stress you out or anything like that. It might just be something as simple as a time management thing. But there could be this scenario where there's two people interviewing you and they'll kind of, feed off of each other's questions, still try to make it a comfortable conversation, but it's not always one on one. All right. So let's keep going now. So we've kind of talked about what to expect on interview day. Like I said, if you've already had some residency interviews, drop your experiences in the comment. Let me know what your favorite part of your interview day was, and we can certainly talk about that along the way. But before we go any further, quick reintroduction. If you've just joined, my name is Masood Mohammed. We are doing the first ever Med School Moose live stream talking all about residency interview advice. I am one of the people at my residency program that interviews the residents, that interviews the medical students. I am on the committee that determines the final rank list. So I'm here. It's a free event, hopefully giving you guys a lot of information to make sure you are succeeding on residency day, on interview day. That being said, let's go into some must-know tips. Before we go any further, let's check the chat one more time. Lives Good 100, you are welcome. All right. So must-know tips. What do we need to do to set ourselves up for success on interview day? The first tip that I think you guys need to know is you need to prepare and practice your elevator speech. I've written an article about this on my website. It's probably the most popular article that I've written, to my surprise. But the elevator speech, it's a really simple premise. It's the amount of time that it would take for you and another person in an elevator. Basically, you get to give them an introduction of yourself for as long as that elevator is going up. So the general recommendation is somewhere about 30 seconds. One of the questions that you're going to get during every single residency interview is that dreaded, tell me about yourself. You know you're going to get that question, so you 100% want to prepare your elevator speech to make sure that you're set up for success. What does that look like? It's really going to be a basic introduction about you, about where you're coming from, what you've been doing with your life, why you want to pursue this specialty. And you definitely want to throw some things in there about yourself. You want to be personal. You want to mention your hobbies, your interests, that kind of thing. Because, as we'll talk about a lot later, that is one of the big things that can lead to a lot of interview questions and conversation during the rest of the interview. One of the things that's included in Residency CAS, it's included in the ERAS application, is that hobbies and interests section. I've said this many, many times before. You do not want to shortchange that section. You want to put yourself out there. You want to put your interests, the things that you love to do out there, because a lot of interview questions will come from that. It might not even be about the residency program at all. They might just talk to you about skiing or cooking or rock climbing or whatever your hobby is. And that will be a much more enjoyable conversation. And there'll be a lot more memorable conversation for you and for the interviewer. So one of the things that you definitely want to make sure that you're doing is preparing your elevator speech, practicing it. So making sure that when you're asked it again and again and again in these residency interviews, that you have it pat down, ready to go, and that you're crushing it. One of the other things that you want to do while you're preparing for these residency interviews is, of course, preparing responses to some of the common questions. And we'll talk about this a lot later. But of course, practice makes perfect. There are a lot of questions like, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? These are common residency interview questions. If you know they're coming, you got to prepare for them. Make sure that you have something prepared, and make sure that you're not floundering when you get these questions on interview day. So you want to be practicing responses to these common interview questions. In addition to that, one of the things that you want to do is you want to do your research about a residency program, right? You want to know what the program has to offer. If you're interested in a specific fellowship, if you're interested in something like global health or, social outreach or volunteering or something like that, You want to go on the website, right? A lot of residency programs, almost all residency programs nowadays, will have their own dedicated website outside of the hospital. They'll have their own social media that has nothing to do with the hospital. And there's a ton of information on there about the residents, where they come from, where they're going, what the schedule looks like, what they have to offer, wellness, so many different things. So if you take a little bit of time, do that research and get that information, if it's something that's of interest to you, you can ask those questions on interview day. And not only will you get information that'll help make you more informed and help make your decision when you're ranking these programs later on, but it also makes you look good because it looks like you've done your research. You know what you're talking about. You came to this residency interview prepared. So, doing a little bit of that research, a little bit of that due diligence is huge in making you look good on interview day. Another must know tip to make sure that you're ready for interview day is you need to be kind to everyone. The thing that I like to tell medical students is that the residency interview starts as soon as you walk out of the car. You know, if there's a gate attendant in the parking garage, if there's a receptionist at the front desk, if the janitor is walking by, you want to be kind to everyone because you don't know what role they're playing. A lot of these people have open communication with the faculty, with the residency program, that kind of thing, and you don't want to give off a bad impression. You don't want to be, rude or disrespectful. No, forget to open a door for someone, something like that. It certainly goes a long way. So you want to make sure that you're being kind to everyone on interview day. You want to put your best foot forward because a bad attitude is one of the things that'll sink a residency interview 1000%. Some other must know tips. Really, like I said before, you want to be yourself. One of the things that I also like to tell students is as much as these residency programs are interviewing you, you're interviewing them. You want to make sure that they're a good fit for you. You want to make sure that the residents are people that you can get along with because it's going to be a long 3, 4, 5, maybe even longer than that years. Residency is hard. You want to make sure that you're in the place that's good for you. You want to make sure that you're happy, that you're satisfied and fulfilled in this career. So don't be afraid to ask questions about things that are important to you, whether that's something like wellness or childcare or physical fitness, or like I said, asking the residents some of those personal questions like, do you have time to go see the doctor? Do you have time to go see the dentist? These are silly things, but it really does add up when you're not having this free time in residency. And the residents are awesome for giving you insight about that. So be sure that you're yourself, have an honest conversation, make an honest connection with your interviewer, and do a little bit of interviewing yourself to make sure that you're finding what's the best fit for you. One other bonus thing that I want to tell you guys about residency interviews, and this is something that I did during my residency interviews, it's something that I still do when I'm interviewing, is once that interview day is done, once you get back in your car, before you start the car, before you text your friends, family, anything like that, grab a notebook. I've got tons of notebooks. I'm a big believer in those. And just write out your thoughts. Write out what you liked, what you didn't like, some of the people that you met, what your overall impression was. This is huge. The reason being is because, especially if you've started having interviews now in October or in November, it's going to be 3, 4 months before you're creating your residency rank list. And you might forget a lot of these things. So I definitely recommend, as soon as you get in your car right before, just take 5 minutes or so, just journal down some thoughts about what your interview day was like, what your experience was like, give it a rating, whatever will help trigger your memory when you're thinking about this and reflecting on it later so that you can make a really informed decision about your residency rank list. That is huge. That is something that I think is so helpful to do. And hopefully that's something you guys do as well. Let's see, more questions. We have a question from Karna Mangrola, 6164 again. Any tips or questions you feel an applicant can use to get better behind the scenes ideas for a residency while also staying professional? That's a great question. And again, I think this is when it comes to being able to speak with the residents, whether it's a virtual residency interview day or an in-person day. That residency program is going to give you a little bit of time with the residents. It might be the day before the interview. It might be while you're getting a tour of the hospital. It might be an interview with a resident themselves. But it is totally okay to ask questions. You don't want to do anything inappropriate or be unprofessional. But if you have a question, something that's important to you, something that's a priority in your life, 100% you should be asking that question so that you can get that information. I think that's something that's super helpful. Judy Kiwi, I love you too. Thank you so much. Love the mic setup. Yeah, it's a new setup. Hopefully the audio is going okay. But thank you so much for the support. So we've talked about must know tips. Hopefully that's been helpful for you guys. While we're going on, let me know in the chat, what was the best piece of advice you got for your residency interviews? All right, Let's keep going. So we've talked about tips for success. Now we need to know some of the things, some of the mistakes to absolutely avoid during your residency interview day. And I think there's a few big things. One of them is don't regurgitate your CV. A lot of medical students, I've seen this a lot of times when I'm interviewing them, especially when they're doing that elevator speech, they'll just try to tell me every single awesome experience that they've had, that they were a scribe and that they did this research and that they did this and that. And I already have all of that information, right? I already reviewed your EVAS application, your residency CAS application. I did the digging. I have all that information that you took so much time and put into that. I just want to get to know you now. I want to get to know you as a person, what you're into, what drives you, why you want to go into this field, what you do on the bad days, how you kind of maintain your balance. All of those things are super important to me. Like I said, a big part of these interviews is about making a genuine human connection. That's one of the most important things. So there is no need to regurgitate your resume, your CV, all of your experiences. I have those things. And if it's something that I'm really interested in, I'm probably going to ask a question about it, right? Same thing like those hobbies and those interests. If it's something that's really grabbing my attention, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question and I'm going to get that information that I need. Let's see. Audio is fantastic. Video quality is fantastic. Thank you so much. Trying my best out here. Karna is now asking best advice I heard. Try to reflect on every experience and a small takeaway from each to show introspection and everything as a learning opportunity. 100%. I think that's a great way to approach it. All of these interviews, even if it's a place that you think is a reach program or a place that you 100% don't want to go, if you're interviewing there, it's great practice for your interview skills. It's a great way to kind of get comfortable going through that process, thinking about the questions that you want to be asking and practicing those common interview questions that are going to come up. So there's always some value to be gotten out of these. So make sure that you're not shortchanging these. I know a lot of students, if they've applied to a ton of programs and they have 15, 20 interviews, it's easy to kind of take your foot off the gas near the end, but you never know when you might be able to make that genuine connection, when you might fall in love with a residency program that's the perfect fit for you. So you always want to be on your A game and you always want to be asking all the good questions and making sure that you're evaluating that program. Deep Planet 15 is asking, how can I use AI to prep for interviews, any prompts or scenarios? This is a really great question. And this is something that's kind of popped up a lot more this year. There's a lot of websites about that kind of thing, a lot of websites offering AI services. I don't really know how I feel about that, but AI is obviously super helpful. And I think the two biggest ways to kind of prepare for that are one, doing a mock interview with the AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, whatever you use. You can prompt it to do a mock interview and kind of go through the processes, go through your thought processes of answering questions and things that you should do to prepare and all of those kinds of things. So that's one of the big things is kind of setting up a mock interview with that AI. The other thing is kind of refining those answers to the common residency interview questions that you're going to get. Like I said, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there are a ton of questions that more than likely you're going to be getting on a residency interview day. It's not a secret. We're not gatekeeping these things. There are certain things that we do want to know, and if you know those questions are coming, write them down, get them ready, get your responses ready. You can talk to a Chat GPT or another AI, kind of refine your responses, make sure that they're nice and buttoned up, so that when you are practicing them and then you go for your interview day, you have your responses locked and loaded, and you'll be able to crush these interview questions. That's a great question there. Amro Khalid 8094. Can I ask a question about medical school lifestyle? 100%. Go ahead and ask your question. I'm going to keep on going with some of these mistakes to avoid, and I'll check the chat and I'll get to that question whenever it's there. So mistakes to avoid, like we said, we don't want to regurgitate our CV. One of the other big mistakes that we want to avoid is giving overly generic or overly rehearsed responses. Now, now we're a little bit confused, right? Because I said that we need to practice our responses. We need to have answers to these questions, but we don't want it to be overly rehearsed. We don't want it to be robotic, which is why we want to practice it. We want to make sure that it's, simple, kind of down to earth, conversational. We don't want it to sound like we're practicing this in the mirror for 10 days in advance. Another important thing is that we want to avoid generic responses. One of the things that I tell medical students, and when I see this in interviews, it makes me cringe, honestly, is if I ask about a specific experience, whether it's volunteering or research or something like that, if a medical student gives me a generic response, I can 100% tell that that actually wasn't that big of a deal for them. It wasn't a meaningful experience, an important experience for them, even if they designated it as one. on their application. So that's a problem for me. You want to not be generic. You should only be putting things in your application that you can really speak to, that you have a lot of experience with, that you got something out of, you got personal growth and fulfillment out of that. So when medical students are giving those generic responses on interview day, it kind of turns me off a little bit and it makes it hard to continue with the rest of the conversation. Let's get back to the chat real quick. Amro Khalid is asking, there is so many lectures I have to do and so short time, how to fix this? Well, this is primarily about residency interviews, and we can talk about that maybe a little bit more in the comments, but definitely staying organized, kind of blocking out time to make sure that you're getting specific things done that's applicable to medical school, that's applicable to residency interviews, that kind of thing. One of the big productivity hacks that I like to use is time blocking, where you'll set aside specific blocks in your calendar to get things done. So whether it's an exam or an interview that's coming up that you need to kind of do your research and prepare your questions for, put it in your calendar that Wednesday at 3 p.m., I'm going to spend an hour doing this. And that way you kind of stay on track, you kind of stay organized with the things that you need to get done. Like I said, we can talk about that a lot more in the comments, but we'll get back to the residency interview stuff for now. Karna Mangrola 6164 is asking another question. Thoughts on post interview communication? Does it mean anything? How does one not overthink it? This is an awesome question, and I'm so glad you brought it up because I made a video about this on the Med School Moose YouTube channel to kind of talk about what to do after a residency interview. I think it is 100% okay for medical students to be sending emails, or if they really want to, a thank you letter or a thank you note, to kind of express their gratitude and to kind of put their self back into that interviewer's mind, kind of make themselves a little bit more memorable. It's certainly not something that you need to overthink. A simple email, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I look forward to hearing back in the future. Something simple like that really goes a long way. Not only does it show your appreciation for the interviewer and their time, but like I said, it kind of makes you stick out a little bit more in their mind. It kind of gives them that quick refresh. Oh, yeah, I did interview that person, and we did have a really good conversation about broccoli. Why do I say broccoli? Because that was something that I asked a medical student about one time because they put it in their residency application. In their interests, they said, I know how to make the best broccoli in the world. Super random, but then I was very curious. How do you make the best broccoli in the world? So if you're that medical student who put that in your application and then you send me an email, thank you so much for interviewing me. Let me know how that broccoli recipe turns out. That's a really unique thing. That's going to stick in my mind a little bit, and you'll be a little bit more memorable in this big sea of interviews that are going on. All right. Now, let's get back to the other mistakes that you need to avoid. As we're still going, be sure to drop any other questions, any other comments that you have in the chat. I'll keep checking it. But we just talked about not giving overly generic or rehearsed responses. One of the other important things that you want to do during these residency interviews is you don't want to get too cocky or unprofessional or anything like that, especially in the pre-interview social. You would think it doesn't happen, and unfortunately, it does. Some medical students get a little bit too unprofessional. They'll start, saying something inappropriate, or they'll start cursing, or if there's alcohol at these pre-interview socials, some medical students might drink too much. It seems silly, but I've seen it happen, and it can absolutely sink your interview, and you will not get ranked. So it's very important. It's totally fine if the culture of that residency program is a little bit more laid back. You can kind of be laid back too, but it is still an interview where you're still being evaluated. So you really want to make sure that you're not doing anything unprofessional or something that would be memorable in a bad way. All right. The last mistake that you should avoid when it comes to residency interview days is not asking questions. I said it before and I'll say it again. As much as these residency interview programs are interviewing you, you are interviewing them. So if you have pressing questions, things that you want to know, things that might be make or break when you're making your residency rank list, be sure to ask those questions. The last thing that you want is to walk away from a residency interview and feel like you have an incomplete picture, feel like you don't have all of the information that you need to make your rank list later on. So it can be a little bit intimidating. Sometimes you're up against the clock, especially with these virtual interviews, but make sure that you try to find some time to ask those interview questions, those things that are important to you. All right, we'll check the chat real quick. Nothing else new, so we'll keep on going. One of the other things that I want to talk about is some interview gear that you need to have. We'll kind of talk about gear for virtual interviews and then gear for in-person interviews. We're not reinventing the wheel here, but I think it's important to highlight. For virtual interviews, if you're going to get one thing to help you with your interview, you need to get a laptop stand. That's my personal opinion. The reason being is because it lifts your computer up so that you're kind of speaking more at eye level. I'm actually have a laptop stand here right now. and it seems a little bit more informal. Your laptop is lifted up. You're kind of looking straight ahead as opposed to looking down at a small screen, and you feel like you're able to have a more normal conversation. I think it makes a huge difference. Of course, in addition to a laptop stand, you want to have a high quality webcam. Fortunately, a lot of new laptops nowadays have really great webcams, so you're probably good to go there. Unless you have an old laptop, you might want to consider getting a newer, higher quality webcam, something that's like 1080p, just to make sure that you're not having to deal with any technical issues on interview day. In addition to that, of course, you want to have a good interview internet connection. Excuse me. Test it ahead of time. Make sure that the streaming quality is okay. If you need to get something like a Wi-Fi extender, I certainly recommend that as well. The last thing that you want to have stress you out on interview day is to have technical difficulties with the Wi-Fi, because that'll just really throw you off your game. So make sure, test it in advance, and make sure that your connection is set up for success. The one other thing that I want to mention, keep in mind when you're on these virtual interviews, the interviewer can't see what's going on around you. So if you want to have a little candle to kind of help, have a nice aroma in the room, if you want to have a sticky note on the side of your screen saying, "Hey, you got this, you're going to crush it," something like that, those things go a long way. The interviewer is not going to see it. It might help boost your mood a little bit. So feel free to kind of customize it a little bit, have something a little nice, set the mood, motivate yourself, whatever you need to get through the interview day. A lot of these interview days, especially on the virtual interviews, they can be long. You can be sitting at your computer for several hours at a time. So if you need something like that to help you get through the day, I 100% recommend it. That's something that I've done in the past also. So those are some of the things that I think are critical for virtual interviews. Let's get back to the chat real quick. Deep Planet 15, any tips on building rapport during the interview? Great question. And like I said, I think the big thing here is building genuine connection. So there are a few different things that go into this. You can do a little bit of research on who you're interviewing with in advance. And a lot of these programs, they'll have some type of bio for their faculty that'll tell you, where they're from, what their interests are, what their hobbies are. And you might be able to make a connection there. Maybe that person that you're interviewing with is from the same city that you're from. Maybe they have a shared interest that you have. So being able to do that research and finding a time to kind of organically bring that up during your conversation, I think really builds a lot of rapport, builds a really great connection. The other thing is that if the residency interviewer says something along those lines or mentions something or has artwork or something like that, in the background while they're interviewing you, that's another way to make a great connection. One other thing that I'll throw out there, especially with these virtual residency interviews, pets, right? A lot of residency interviewers, they'll have their pets, their cat will jump into the frame or they'll be holding their little dog. Things like that are a simple way to kind of make a genuine connection and build rapport with your interviewers. Awesome questions in the chat here. Karna Mangrola asking another one, tips on how to handle technical difficulties for virtual interviews. This is stressful, right? So, first of all, you want to set yourself up for success. You want to make sure that everything's good to go ahead of time. You want to have your laptop stand. You want to have your webcam working. You want to test your internet connection, have someone go in the other room and get on a Zoom call with them and test your connection to make sure that it's high quality. If you run into those issues, typically there is a person that's a point of contact. It's usually the residency coordinator, and you'll have their information, you'll have their cell phone number, and they are monitoring all of these chats, all of these Zoom sessions at one time. Send them a quick call, a quick text, let them know what's going on. They can, pull you into a room and kind of set you somewhere else, and or do a phone interview or that kind of thing. For us on the faculty side, these residency interviews, they can be stressful as well because there's a lot of moving parts, but you should have a point of contact. Reach out to that person. We can certainly help you. If things are really not working out with the interview connection, we can always do an interview over the phone or reschedule for another time if we need to. But the important thing there is don't worry about it. Don't stress. These things happen all the time. So we will 100% find a way to work through it. Don't let it throw you off on interview day because we'll get it figured out. Awesome question there. So thank you so much for asking that. So we just talked about some of the interview gear that you need for virtual interviews. What about in-person interviews? Obviously, it'll start with professional attire. That's one of the number one things. You want to bring out your suit, your pantsuit, whatever it is. Make sure that you're dressed to the nines. Make sure that you're dressed for success, not only because it will present as professional, but it'll also make you feel good, right? Look good, feel good. I think that's super important. If you're traveling for these interviews, one of the things that I'm a big fan of are the compression packing cubes. I think those are a really great way to stay organized when you're jumping around on interviews. The interview trail, especially if you have some interviews back to back to back, can be super stressful. You really want to make sure that you're staying organized. So having something like compression packing cubes or a garment bag for your suit for your professional attire is really huge, really helpful. In addition to that, like I said, you want to look your best. Having something like a portable steamer to take with you so that your suit's not crumpled up on interview day. Having a lint roller to make sure that you're not, covered in dog hair or something like that on interview day. And then one other thing I like to recommend are those Listerine breath strips. Last thing you want when you're having an in-person interview is to have some bad breath, some of that halitosis, right? So make sure that you have those things, kind of set yourself up. One other thing that I'll throw out there, having a pad folio, right? This is something that I think is important. It's totally fine to take notes when you're on your interview day. So, if you have a simple pad folio like this, kind of scribble down some notes. Certainly, you can use this at the end of the day as well to kind of write down your thoughts about the interview. But I would definitely recommend having these. I still use them when I go on interviews myself. Really great questions there. All right. So let's keep going. We've talked about interview gear. We've talked about tips for success. We've talked about mistakes to avoid. One other thing that I want to mention as we close out this first ever live stream are questions to expect on interview day. I've talked about this a tons of times. I have a free resource on my website, medschoolmoose.com. Definitely check that out because that is there. But like I said, there are certain questions that we usually almost always ask during these residency interviews. Top of the list is tell me about yourself. That's one that you're going to get 99%. Prepare your elevator speech, know what you're going to say, put your best foot forward, practice that, and you'll be able to crush that question on interview day. In addition to that, some of the other questions that we like to ask are why are you interested in this specialty? Why are you interested in this program? And that's where your research comes in, right? If there's a specific thing that that program offers that you're interested in, that's where you want to bring that up. It'll make you look informed. It'll make you look like you've done your research. Other things that we like to ask are what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? You definitely want to have examples that you can pull up there as well. Like I said, I have written articles on this in the past. If you check me out on TikTok at Med School Moose or on YouTube, I have also given some samples for how to answer these common residency interview questions. Some of the other questions will be a little bit more situational. So it might be something like, tell me one time when you were a leader, or tell me one time when you had a challenge that you had to deal with and how you overcame it. These questions can be a little bit more difficult if you haven't prepared in advance because you kind of have to come up with the story. You kind of have to dig deep and find something. But if you know these questions are coming, prepare your responses, have a story ready to pull out so that you're ready to go on interview day. These are super important questions to be asking. Karna Mangrola, another question in the chat here. The biggest red flag mistakes you've seen applicants make while serving as a faculty member. Let's see. Let me know what you mean by that. I'm not exactly sure. Biggest red flag mistakes you've seen applicants make while serving as a faculty member. Provide some additional details. I'm not too sure what you mean there. But while you're doing that, we'll get back to the rest of these questions. So like I said, we're going to get some of these situational questions. Tell me about a time you were a leader. Tell me about a time that you had a challenge and how you overcame it. And then some of the other questions are going to be the simple things, right? We want to make that genuine connection. We want to get to know you. So what do you like to do for fun? All right. Hopefully it's already in your application and we have that, but we still want to hear it. We want to hear you talk about something that you're passionate about. Tell me something that you are most proud of. I think is a really awesome interview question. And then one of my personal favorites and something that I ask when I do residency interviews is teach me something. And the reason that I like that question so much is because, I don't want to hear anything about medicine. I want to hear something that you're passionate about, that you're knowledgeable about. Usually when I ask that question, students get really excited. They'll kind of pull out something that was really random, but they will teach me something that is really important to them, something that they used to do when they were a kid, or some hobby that they're really good at, or some skill that they have. Like I said, one medical student told me how to make the best broccoli ever one time, and that really makes you stick out. So I really like that question. I think that's something that's super important. Let's see. Carter Mangrola asking, while interviewing people, were there mistakes that you couldn't believe an applicant made? Yeah, like I said, I think the biggest thing is that applicants are being unprofessional sometimes. I think that's the thing. They'll sometimes, say something that's inappropriate. They'll say something that's a bit controversial. They'll, kind of start getting too comfortable. They'll start cursing, those kinds of things that can really kind of mess up the interview and mess up the flow and really kind of turn me off to, them being a potential applicant. So really good question. Uh, and I think that's it. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. Like I said, if you have any other questions, drop them in the chat real quick and I can answer them before we get out of here. But please, please, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. Check out my website, medschoolmoose.com. There's a ton of helpful articles on there about residency advice and some resources on there as well. Check me out on social media where I have made videos answering some of the common residency interview questions that you should expect on interview day. And be sure to subscribe. And let me know what you think about this live stream. If you like it, I can certainly do others in the future. Thank you so much. Deep Planet, thank you so much for the stream. Carnaman Gorilla, thank you, thank you. Psyche, Dandy, Side, thank you for the help. I would be lost without this. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. If you have any other questions, drop them in the comments. I'll be checking on those. I'll answer them. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.